أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وإذ قال موسى لقومه يا قوم اذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ جعل فيكم أنبياء وجعلكم ملوكا وآتاكم ما لم يؤت أحدا من العالمين. يا قوم ادخلوا الأرض المقدسة التي كتب الله لكم ولا ترتدوا على أدباركم فتنقلبوا خاسرين. قالوا يا موسى إن فيها قوما جبارين وإنا لن ندخلها حتى يخرجوا منها فإن يخرجوا منها فإنا داخلون. قال رجلان من الذين يخافون أنعم الله عليهم ادخلوا عليهم الباب فإذا دخلتموه فإنكم غالبون وعلى الله فتوكلوا إن كنتم مؤمنين. قالوا يا موسى إنا لن ندخلها أبدا ما داموا فيها فاذهب أنت وربك فقاتلا إنا هاهنا قاعدون. قال رب إني لا أملك إلا نفسي وأخي. قال رب إني لا أملك إلا نفسي وأخي فافرق بيننا وبين القوم الفاسقين. قال فإنها محرمة عليهم 40 سنة يتيهون في الأرض فلا تأس على القوم الفاسقين. صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakumullah khair. So what is Mass Queen Center all about? Before we get into the program, I'm going to give you guys a quick rundown of what we do here. As you can see on the slide, we have pictures of our youth night. This is from the last Ramadan. Every week, every weekend, we had youth night, youth qiyam, iftar, and much more. These should be videos. Yes, videos of what our programs look like here. We have halaqas weekly, we have revives pretty much monthly. And alhamdulillah, there's a lot of good work that happens here, a lot of opportunities to volunteer, and a lot of community that is built over time. Here we have a couple brothers reciting, some of our programs, some of our registration events, some of our revert events, our weekend school, our food distribution, and much, much more. We also have the opportunity to volunteer with us. If anyone would like, you can just simply scan the QR code, join the volunteer group chat. Inshallah, you'll get connected with the people in the masjid. We have many opportunities throughout the week, throughout different months. So take the initiative, take the chance, and be quick to take this opportunity. This is our next halaqah program. As I mentioned, every Friday we have halaqas. This one, or this series rather, will be about the Khulafa ar-Rashidin, the 4 righteous caliphs after the Prophet ﷺ, with Brother Sanjay and Brother Suhaib. We also have our upcoming Seerah conference, which you can scan the QR code to get tickets. The early bird price is $25. So May 2nd, make sure you grab your tickets now. Quick sneak peek for one of our speakers is Sheikh Ismail Bowers. We're going to continue to be releasing new speakers on our Instagram, so make sure to check out for that. Again, Sheikh Ismail Bowers, it's a big name. Make sure you scan that QR code. And with that being said, let's get into our program. So, our speaker today needs no introduction. Dr. Shadee ElMasry. He hails from the great state of New Jersey. Dr. Shadee was inspired to study Islam in the traditional manner as he traveled, and he has been to places such as Mecca, Medina, Egypt, Morocco, and Yemen for the sake of studying. He learned Arabic, Aqidah, and Fiqh, and he also completed a master's degree from George Washington University, and he wrote his thesis on Muhammad al-Ayyubi, and he also received his PhD in 2007 from the University of London on Imam al-Haddad. When he was back in the States, he taught Arabic at Yale for 4 years before moving back to the home state of New Jersey. Since then, he has continued to work as a sheikh and as an educator at New Brunswick Islamic Center, and he has since founded the Safina Society YouTube page, which hosts a popular live stream and a successful online learning platform. With that being said, please welcome our sheikh with a warm round of applause. Jazakumullah khair.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. I want to thank the Sharif Ahmed, the Math Center, and all the brothers, Brother Ashraf and everyone else putting this together, and all the volunteers and brothers and sisters who volunteered to put this event together, because this is an important subject. And it's a great opportunity too, now that Allah has raised up an enemy that's in our face, that's made everybody start to think twice. And also maybe we can take the echo off the mic until the next Salah.
Switch the mic.
Yeah. But so today's subject, to get going right off the bat, it serves the question of how did the generation of Salah al-Ayyubi come to exist? Salah al-Ayyubi is oftentimes the symbolic name for victory, the victory over enemies, the elevation of Islam. It becomes like a symbol. It's like a symbolic name. But Salah al-Ayyubi, in the history, in fact, is merely the point of the arrow. He's the point of an arrow. There is equally or more greater and more interesting history of what produced him. And he is really only the final point of the arrow and the final cherry on top, is Salah al-Ayyubi. Salah ad-Din had so much working for him that it's not to say anybody could have done what he did, but a lot of people could have done, in reality, what he did. Maybe not as good. Maybe with the elegance that he did. Maybe without the beauty, the generosity, and the forgiveness. I personally believe he was chosen to do this job, to be that final point of victory and that symbol of victory, because of how generous he was. And Allah loves for His representative to be someone gentle and generous. But there's an amazing history before him. And all of this has been gathered in a book for which provided most of the documentation of this talk that I'm about to give, which is how the generation of Salah ad-Din appeared and how Jerusalem was recaptured. Okay. And in this book, I basically take what's needed and formulate this lecture out of it. And this lecture is going to cover 4 things. Number 1, the diagnosis of the ills of an ummah, of an Islamic ummah when it collapses. What is a diagnosis? Number 2, misconceptions surrounding this diagnosis. There are a lot of misconceptions people have when we explain the diagnosis the way we're going to explain it. Number 3, the 3 corruptions. And number 4, the 3 rectifications. And each of these corruptions and rectifications, they entail a group of people and how this group of people went astray. And when this compounded, you end up with a type of stage 4 cancer, and an outsider comes and conquers you. That's your death, essentially. Then you need to revive it by going back to each of these corruptions and fixing them one at a time. So in terms of the diagnosis, the diagnosis of the tribulation that befalls Muslims anywhere at any time, whether it's the current day or whether it's Andalusia and the Crusades, there's a Western Crusades known as the Reconquista, or it's the situation of the Eastern Crusades, or any other collapse of Muslims, the diagnosis is always the same. And that diagnosis, the first thing we have to understand is that there is a big difference between symptoms and causes. And if you confuse the two, you're not going to succeed. So let's take an example of a person who's extremely overweight, eats terribly, doesn't exercise, ends up with high blood pressure, and ends up with diabetes. So is the high blood pressure and diabetes the cause or the symptom? It's the symptom. We all know that. Likewise in Islam, when an enemy comes into your house and into your country and kills you and defeats you and does all these things to you and wars and genocides, are they the cause or the symptom? If you think they're the cause, you're making a mistake. They're the symptom. They are the symptom. Right? A rotten fruit or a bad tasting fruit, it's never caused by the skin of the fruit or the meat of the fruit. It's always caused by a disease in the trunk of the tree or the roots of the tree. So in the same fashion, the causes and the symptoms cannot be confused. Now, one of the misconceptions here is that when you downgrade something from a symptom from a cause to a symptom, you're downgrading it. People sometimes imagine, oh, you're saying we shouldn't do anything about it? Right? They make this mistake. That's not the case. If a guy is overweight and he's got diabetes and he's got high blood pressure, if you don't treat the symptoms, he dies faster. So you have to treat the diabetes. You got to treat the high blood pressure. But if that's all that you do, all you're going to be is in a loop. Nothing other than more diabetes, and then you remedy it short term, and then you get more high blood pressure and you remedy it short term, and it's going to get worse and you're just going to need more medicine. And then those medicine will produce side effects and so on and so forth. So a treatment plan for somebody with this situation is that he has to get treatment to the symptoms, but he also has to get treatment for the cause. In our world today, you have people who are treating symptoms and people who are treating causes, but oftentimes they don't see eye to eye, and they both think each other is wasting time. So this is why it's so important to understand the diagnosis. Another part of this is to understand theologically what tribulation is. And the first premise and principle, al-Rukn, to understand is that nobody is autonomous. The only power is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only doer of things is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every Muslim, every one of us, has to view that the only thing that I should really worry about is my own intentional actions. But what other people do to me, I should view it as Allah's will for me. That doesn't mean I won't have to fight them back. I'm going to react to it by Sharia. If the Quran tells us you have to fight back, you fight back. If the Quran tells us be patient, be patient. But my view of it, my spiritual view of it, is that this is a cause. He is a sabab. This person has been brought to my life in order to fix something within me. The great Imam al-Shafi'i said, I praise Allah for the enemy who tells me the truth about myself. So how did he view his enemy? His enemy is showing him his weaknesses. If it hurts you, then you have a weakness there. So he's actually benefiting you, because I could repatch my armor a lot better. Whether it's my emotional armor, or my intellectual armor, or my physical armor. So this the first part of the diagnosis is how we even view the enemy in the first place. If you view him as an autonomous figure, your aqidah is completely messed up. And you will be serving 10 different gods. You will be worrying about 100 different things. But the concept of Tawheed is also the Tawheed of actors in the world. And there's only one doer of things. Everybody in your eyes is Allah's will for you. And this is why the Arifin always say, I see Allah in everything. So it sounds like pantheism, but what they mean by that is, I see that Allah is the actual doer of everything. He is the one who gathered us for this talk. He is the one who arranged for the people who organized this talk to do it to get some good deeds and maybe to learn something, and for everyone to be in this room. Maybe some other benefits will occur. And it's a test for people. And a lot of other things. So this, the first thing is the theological view of your enemy is extremely important. Because if you don't have the right perception, you'll never have the right medicine. If you don't have the right diagnosis, if you don't understand the equation as it is, you'll never get to the right answer. Just to give you an example. The other day I was doing homework with a kid, one of my kids, and we were doing algebra equation. In this algebra equation, the answer in the back of the book was one thing. The answer we kept getting was another answer completely. And the equation wasn't bringing us a clean number. So you do the equation like you get the final equation you get 4x equals 16. It's a clean number, x equals 4. We're getting an odd number. So what's the solution? It's not to keep redoing the equation. It's to go see, did we understand the equation properly? So we miswrote the equation. We wrote something wrong in the equation. That's why you're getting the wrong answer. No matter how hard you work, you're going to get the wrong answer. So you have to understand the mas'ala, the issue, you have to understand it properly first. So the challenge that we have here for a Muslim is always between him and Allah, number one. Everything else is a proxy for this relationship. This is something to understand for life. Forget Gaza and Israel. Everything in life is between you and Allah. And everything else is a proxy for that. A proxy means something that you do that is sort of in between. For example, when they say a proxy war in Yemen was between Saudi and Iran, that means they were fighting over Yemen. Neither Saudi or Iran were there, but they would fund one side each. So that's the meaning of a proxy. A proxy is something that is not really the goal in itself, but it's leading to something else. So that's the theological view and understanding of everything. But it must be emphasized in times of war. It must be emphasized in times of drama, because we're emotionally grasped. Our emotions are so taken up by it, and we start hating the enemy, but in fact, we're making an aqidah mistake in the process. We're viewing the enemy as an autonomous being. And all of us, we may never face a Zionist army, the IDF, but we have enemies. Our own self may be an enemy, fighting our temptations and fighting our own disease of our own hearts. But we all have adversaries. And this also works for the good. Even the Prophet ﷺ said, love your beloved somewhat. Yeah, with some ease. Not so extreme. These may be some days your enemy. Even the ones who love you, you can't view them. And the guys who pay you and they run your life runs on their paycheck. Don't view them as the source of risk. They're just the means. If Allah takes them away, He can bring you somebody else. So this is the first portion, and it has in it these three sub-portions, subjects, which is number one, the difference between the cause, and number two, the symptom. Separation of causes and symptoms. And number three, the theological view of tribulations, of wars. Right now, if someone says to you, what is the view? How do you summarize what's happening to the Islamic Ummah? The correct answer, the deepest answer, that addresses the causes, is an Ummah has gone astray and Allah is rectifying it through an enemy. And Ummah has gone astray, and Allah rectifies it through it. Why do you have high blood pressure? Why do you have diabetes? Allah is telling you, you're eating wrong. You're not exercising, you're living wrong. So your body's pulling alarms. Same thing is happening to you. Now, if you only exist at the plane of symptoms, and someone said, what's going on? The enemies of Islam are pitting us against each other. The hypocrites are running our countries and just going on the payroll of the CIA. And the Zionists are plotting and planning and building greater Israel. So you are correct, but you exist on the plane of asbab. That is not actually what's happening here. That is just the means by which what happens. They're the means. What's actually happening is Allah has elevated your enemy to purify you, to set you right, to wake you up to your problem. That's actually what's happening. And that's how we have to understand it. Now, again, I want to go to Roman numeral 2. What are the misconceptions that we're saying here? There are two misconceptions. Whenever I talk about this subject, people get two misconceptions. Number one, just because you deem something to be a symptom is that you're promoting inaction. And just stay in your home and do nothing because it's just a symptom. That's not true at all. As the analogy of the unfit person, you still have to treat their blood pressure. You still have to treat their diabetes. And that's a great deed to do so. But you will do a better job if you understand the equation properly, and that we're right now treating symptoms. You're treating a symptom right now. You'll do better if you understand reality as it is. So treating symptoms, it's just because something is a symptom does not mean it's not fun to treat it. So the people who are wrongly taken by ICE in our circumstances, it's a fard upon us to do something for them. It's a fard upon us to get attention to their plight in any way, shape, and form. It's an obligation upon us as a community. We call that fard kifaya. It's an obligation right now to fight every oppressor. So we don't separate and say just because something is a symptom does not mean you don't treat it. And it does not mean the people treating it are praiseworthy. Number two, just because you believe that something is a sabab, is a means by which Allah does something else, does not mean they're blameless. Does not mean they're innocent. Allah Ta'ala uses the good and the bad for His purposes. And He uses evil. Iblis himself, he is a tool. Does that mean he's innocent? No. He's going to be taken into account. As we all, ins and jinn, are taken into account and are morally responsible. لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ وَعَلَيْهَا مَا اكْتَسَبَتْ. Ins and jinn, we have something called kasb, which is the ability to make an intention and to intentionally choose between right and wrong. Now you may successfully do the right, and we call that tawfiq. And you may fail to do the right, and Allah still gives you the reward of it. And you may intend evil and not do it. You get rewarded for that. And you don't get sins for that. You intended to do something wrong, but Allah gave you a flat tire, and you didn't do it. Allah gives you a good deed for that. You intend to do wrong, and you do wrong. You get punished for that. So you break it up into 4 parts. Okay? So we call that kasb. So just because something is a sabab and a means does not mean that it's blameless. So those are the two misconceptions. We now move to Roman numeral 3. The 3 corruptions. What are the 3 corruptions? The 3 corruptions are, number 1, in Islam, the corruption number 1 in the Islamic community is always the scholars. The ulama are target number 1 for Iblis. The ulama are credit number 1 when things go right. The scholars. The Quran, the only thing the Quran asked us to make a dua and commanded us to ask for more of was what? Did Allah say, Rabbi zidni imanan? No. Rabbi zidni malan? No. Rabbi zidni tawfiqan? No. Rabbi zidni jihadan? No. Rabbi zidni hifzan? No. Did Allah say, oh, well, increase me in success, increase me in wealth, increase me? No. The only phrase that says, Rabbi, oh my Lord, increase me, is knowledge. Why is that? Because knowledge will lead you to all those other things. Everything good you can imagine, and Allah summarizes the source of it all. So you like apples, you like oranges, so trees. Okay? Allah summarizes it in the source of it all. I want this apple, I want this apple, I want this apple. How about this? Why don't you ask Allah for a seed? Then you have as many apples as you want. Okay? So that's the concept of Allah Ta'ala summarizing something that gives you everything. So the scholars are the number one reason why things go corrupt. And when the scholars go corrupt, who goes corrupt after that? The people. Because the scholars are the doctors of the ummah. They're the salt on the food. They're the medicine in the hospital. The Prophet ﷺ said the likeness of the scholar to the people is the likeness of me to the rest of you, or the least of you, or the likeness of the moon to the stars. That's how important knowledge is, and that's a position of scholars. And he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the scholars of my ummah are like the prophets of Bani Israel. In other words, they fulfill the same purpose, not that they're infallible or get revelation. The scholars in the time of the century before the Crusades, that's where you look at where the corruption started. 1 century out before the Crusades came and Jerusalem fell, the first crusade. Ibn Aqil and others give a history and tell us the history that the number one cause of problems was that scholars had begun serving other things with their knowledge. They began serving themselves, enriching themselves. They began vying for being spokesperson and being in the circle of different sultans. They'd earn a lot of money from this, okay, and prestige. And even the righteous one of them went astray by serving their schools of thought rather than the religion. A madhab exists by necessity. Madhab exists by necessity. Each one of you is going to go home right now and drive back after this event is over. You're going to choose with your mind a methodology. You could take the bus, you could take the train, you could walk, you could bike, you could take an Uber. That's a methodology. You have no choice but to make a decision. You can carpool. If you carpool, you're going to choose who's going to drive. Whoever's going to drive is going to choose, am I going to use my memory or am I going to put it into a map? If you open a map, you have to make a decision. Am I going to use Apple Maps or am I going to use Google Maps? You make decisions all the time. In the religion, the texts of Quran and Hadith demand for us to make decisions all the time. Because not all verses are telling you exactly what to do. But it's giving you a general meaning that can be interpreted two different ways. So madhabs exist by necessity. And once someone succeeds in this madhab, and it's praised, and it works, right? Now he can lose focus and serve the madhab rather than serving the purpose of the madhab, which is to worship. What is the purpose of all madhabs and tariqas? Kamal al-ubudiyya lillah. Completing your servitude to Allah. That's the purpose. That's the real purpose. But people, human beings, have a nature to lose focus, and Iblis is involved in this and making you lose focus and turn now to serving the madhab. And then, what was the main problem between at Baghdad at this time and that spread throughout the ummah was a civil war between the Shafi'is and the Hanbalis. So much so, I believe it was the year 469, a riot broke out between them, in which 20 students and scholars ended up dead, warring by theology, about theology, between the Ash'aris and the Hanbalis. And Ibn Aqil said that the nastiest people towards one another in his time were the jurists, were the scholars. He said, we're lucky that none of them rules. Because if he did, he'd bloodbath the opposition. We're lucky he only has a pen. and not a sword. It's a mercy of Allah that he only has his pen to work with and not a sword. Because of how much the Shafi'iyya and the Hanabila at that time, according to Ibn Aqil, hated each other. So the fighting between one another and the inter-madhab warring. Today, well, you have different groups. So all of this you have to understand and make an analogy and understand how it applies today. Today you have groups. We can sit here and we can name all the groups. And people are so sensitive that it's become like, as Abdul Qadir al-Jailani later on said, he told his preachers, when you go out and teach and preach to the public, don't mention scholars or people or groups. People get too sensitive. They love their group so much, you can't talk about the group. And a person can attack Islam and they get less injured, less affected than if you attack his group. Whether today, it's not schools of thought as much, it's organizations and groups and hizbs, etc., etc., etc. And they forget, what is the purpose of this hizb? What is the purpose of this organization? That's what we forget. And Allah Ta'ala is not going to ask you, did you serve the group? He's going to ask you, did you serve the deen? You can serve the group by tearing down other groups, trying to do good. Now, because of this, Allah sent them a punishment, which is the rise of two completely heretical, so heretical that they were deemed out of Islam. The philosophers and the Batinis. The philosophers were so far off. In fact, what is this mass center called? Ibn Sina. You need to change the name. This man is a heretic. He's a kafir.
We did. We changed it.
What is it now? Mass Queens. Okay. I have to do Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar. It used to be called the Ibn Sina Center, but the man, and later logicians from the scholars tried to make him like a regular Muslim or something, but the man did not believe in the physical existence of heaven and hell. The man was not a suave, educated doctor. He was corpulent and obese, and he was addicted. He was a sex addict. The man is not an example at all, Ibn Sina. The kuffar love him because he's a heretic. That's why. And they elevate him because he's a filasuf. Later on, some Sunnis, they try to they love his logic so much. They try to rebrand him. I'm going to go with what Ghazali said about him. Who came earlier? Ghazali came earlier. And he's the one who fought him. Of course, they lived in different eras. He fought him with his words. And he refuted him. And he wrote a book called Tahafut al-Falasifa. As we're going to get to the rectifications, the rectifiers of the scholars were two. Nizam al-Mulk, he realized the problem is knowledge, and he set up schools. And the fruit of all that, the Nizamiya schools, was Abu Hamd al-Ghazali. This book has a thesis that's very simple. In this book, the author looks at the army of Salah al-Ayyubi. And he traces all of the army back to Nur ad-Din al-Zinki. Everybody knows that. Nur ad-Din preceded Salah ad-Din. And Salah ad-Din inherited everything in Damascus from Nur ad-Din. So he investigated the people who supported Nur ad-Din and Salah ad-Din. And then he traced back, because the Muslim scholars were copious documenters of their teaching traditions, their trees and their isnads. And he found, and he wants to say all, but just to be safe, you can never say all. If you don't know everything, and you don't know every single person that was involved, you can't say all. So he limits himself. He says the vast majority, almost every single scholar. And the scholars were the generals, the scholars were the teachers, the scholars were the dhikr leaders, the scholars were his viziers. Every single one of them, their tree ends up at Abdul Qadir al-Jailani and Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, or one of them. So that's how he works it backwards. And I'm going to read from sections here, the actual documentation that the Islah, the rectification of the Ummah at the time, happened at the hands of two major nodes, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali and Abdul Qadir al-Jailani. One from the Shafi'is and one from the Hanbalis. It's as if that Allah Ta'ala has honored both madhahib with a reviver from one who revived the theory, who purified the theory of knowledge and the methodology of knowledge, and then one who acted upon it, and one who showed how it would manifest in real life. So the scholars themselves were serving their madhab, serving the rulers, serving themselves. And Allah Ta'ala sent them philosophers, and He sent them Batinis. The Batinis were more dangerous than the philosophers. Why is that? Because they actually use the Quran. They don't rely more on Greek philosophers and cancel out certain aspects of the Quran. They use the Quran and they interpret it in such a manner that is purely symbolic. But the Batinis were extremely dangerous in that they had a state. And that state was the Fatimi Shi'i state. So Shi'ism divides into three types. Five are Shi'ism, they believe in 5 Imams, and they're the Zaydis of Yemen that Iran was supporting. Then 7 are Shi'is, these are the Ismailis, and they are the Fatimids of Egypt. And then 12 are Shi'as, that's Imami Shi'ism, is of Iran, and now in Pakistan they have some too, or a lot, and Iraq. The 7ers were the threat of the day. 12ers were not a threat at that time. They had no state, they were no big deal. The 7er Shi'is, which they believe in 7 Imams, Ismail being the last one, and they came from Tunisia. See, Shi'ism was always an Arab phenomenon. It was only a Persian phenomenon about 500 years ago. Persians were the hardest core Shafi'is and Hanbali Sunnis you'd ever see. Only 500 years ago they turned Shia. And they had like a type of genocide of Sunnis. They killed or expelled all the Imams, Sunni Imams, and they brought in new Imams, Shia Imams. They didn't have Persian Shias, that many. They didn't have that. They had, but not that many. So they had to import Arabs from Lebanon, the area now known as Lebanon, where there were Shias, 12 were Shias. In any event, these Tunisians came down and took over Egypt. And now the Ummah was split. The big three in the world at that time was always Iraq, Sham, and Misr. Then they lost Misr. Well, you're infighting all for decades now. Now you're going to start having losses. So the Fatimids, Ismailis, Batinis are the same thing. And they had a special group amongst them whose job was to kill Sunni leaders. And they were famous for smoking marijuana to calm their nerves before an assassination attempt. So they became called the Hashashin, which is how we get the word assassins. Okay? So Assassin's Creed is the Shia game. It's too bad because they picked a really cool looking guy with his hood and everything. But the origin of the assassins is that they were Batini Shi'is who went after Sunnis. And they existed. But in theory, al-Ghazali refuted this philosophy, refuted the Greek philosophers. We're going to talk about the rectifications afterward. What's the third corruption, or the second of 3 corruptions, is the personal corruption. The moment Imams stop doing their job, the moment Imams stop gathering the people, stop speaking in simple language, stop teaching, get busy with diversions and feuds, get busy trying to cater to the elites, they leave the local people, they leave the regular people, they stop educating kids. The greatest of teachers, they are like prophets in their behavior with the people. They serve the people. They serve the elites, they serve children, they serve the poor, they teach everybody. And the godly and divinely Rabbani teachers, you see them teaching kids with the equal passion as teaching the advanced students. They teach 2 people with the equal passion as 2,000 people. Their private life and their public life is one and the same. But when their scholars get corrupted, they leave off the people and they stop teaching. Imam al-Haddad, he famously says that when is the ummah in a good position? It's in a good position when the scholars go out to the heedless people and give them talks. And this idea that the students have to come to the sheikh, that's only after he's become a student. So heedlessness is the first disease that sets in on people. Heedlessness. That the focus is no longer deen. And the focus of people will be deen and akhirah if you make it their focus. If you raise a consciousness of it. If you raise awareness of it. Raising awareness is the job of the ulama. They have to raise people's awareness. When you become a student of knowledge, then you have the himmah, the desire, then you can go, and now you have to follow the rules of the sheikh. And follow his curriculum and follow everything. But ghafla will eventually lead to sins. In this book he cites a history, or a historian, who says that in the century before the Crusades, you could not walk in a single marketplace of Baghdad, except you heard people singing and drinking. And as a result, the prices went up, and when prices went up, the poor resorted to all sorts of unlawful means to earn their income. From prostitution, to selling alcohol, to moving the bottles. Basically, we call that a mule, someone who moves illegal substances. And the poor were engaged in all of these vices to make their ends meet. The people had become corrupted. And the elites had become extremely wealthy and had abandoned the poor. So the second corruption is the corruption of the people. And what is the third corruption? Is the corruption of the political body, the rulers, and the body politic. Why is it to precede the corruption of the people before the corruption of the politicians, the sultans and the kings? Because where did politicians come from? Politicians are not a unique class of beings that descend or come from some foreign entity. They are one of us. Every single king was a child in the town, in the country, before he became a king. So if you don't like him, you have to ask, who raised him? Who taught him to be the way he was? And either people instill bad qualities in people, or they victimize people, and there are no scholars to teach you how to suffer properly. And how to react, I should say, how to react to suffering properly. And as a result, the reaction to the victimization ends up being with deeds that are worse than the original crime. And Marxism is one of the best examples of this. If you look at what caused Marxism to exist, you would say she's justified. The capitalists these are the worst they're the worst of the creation. These people who, the classism of England was so, if you lived there, you could have lived there for a minute. The classism was so bad in England. In all of Europe, the lords' hegemony and domination over the working class was so vile and so miserable and so against the natural free nature that Allah created us with, that you would say, just give me any system besides this. And that's a bad thing to say, because you can get a worse system, which communism was. Communism produced far more deaths, murders, and misery than the disease that it was trying to cure. So when you have people who get victimized, but you don't have any teaching to show them what is the right way to react, you're going to get something worse. And so the rulers were all the worst of the people at the time, and this is what the Prophet warned them. He warned that if you don't, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the Prophet said, if you don't fix what's wrong, then eventually your worst of people will become your rulers. They were the worst of people will be the rulers. And then your dua is irrelevant at that point. Why are you making dua when you had a chance to use the same tongue to fix the wrong? So if you ever see something wrong, and you choose not to say something. And then that wrong thing produces a terrible circumstance, your dua will be answered. Why would Allah listen to your prayer now when you had the same tongue, you held it in when the wrong was happening? This is what the Prophet threatened. He warned us of this. He warned us that if you don't say something when something is wrong, then the moment comes that that wrong thing produces a detrimental result to you personally, don't make dua. We'll make dua, but he's not going to listen to it. Okay? He won't listen to it. Because you had the same tongue, and you didn't use it to forbid the wrong. So ghafla leads to sinfulness, and that was the status. So this is going into the diagnosis. Disobedience of Allah, that is the ultimate cause of all the trouble. And that is what's going to beget an enemy coming from the outside. The diagnosis, the problem, is not that the Pope Urban decided to go throw a crusade and start a crusade. That's not the problem. That's not the problem. There were far more competent crusaders at the time of Salah ad-Din. Far more competent. The original crusaders were a ragtag group of poor people. No organization. There was a roving gang. And they defeated the Muslims. By the time of Salah ad-Din, 88 years later, the Crusaders were far more competent, wealthier, better positioned, and they were defeated. So it's not about your enemy. They are just a means. Okay. Now, let's talk about the rectifications. The three rectifications, we already started mentioning the three rectifications, which was Nizam al-Mulk. He ruled as a vizier, basically like a prime minister of the Seljuk Empire. And the political disaster of the time was that they divided up, just like our countries are divided up. Why should there be a line between Syria and Lebanon? Why should there be a line between Egypt and Sudan? Why should there be a line between Algeria and Morocco? And don't just take the Olympics and the World Cup at face value. These are celebrations of nationalism. They're celebrations of nationalism. And yeah, we just look at it as games and everything, but they're reinforcing lines that are to our detriment. These lines should be dotted lines, just like between, or light line. Between US and Canada is a bold line. Between New Jersey and New York is the thin line. Those are the lines that should be there. And these countries should unify. It's not far-fetched. Algeria, Morocco, and Mauritania should be one country. Like an EU, they should have one currency. Then Libya, then Egypt. The United States is bigger, and they managed to do it. So between Egypt all the way to Mauritania, including Sudan, and Chad is a majority Muslim country, if I'm not mistaken. So is most of the West African countries. Might as well put them in too. And you have one currency, and one army, and one president, and one person to speak on behalf of this body politic. Then it doesn't make a difference, the states in between, what they do. Traffic laws, all these civil laws, it doesn't make a difference. You have one passport, all these should be unified. And you keep this up, and you're going to have a contiguous state. Then no one's going to mess with you. But Allah Ta'ala never allows Muslims to rise up politically when they're corrupt. And that is for the protection of Islam and for the protection of themselves. Because if you're a corrupt person, if you're a bad person, if you're evil, if you make wrong decisions, the worst thing for you is to have more power. You're going to misuse it. So those Muslims specifically would become worse oppressors and have a worse hisab on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And they would give a terrible name for Islam, and they would give a justification for kuffar to never accept Islam. So then if you're an oppressive, if you're somebody who makes decisions based on your desires all the time, and you have more power, you're going to be more of an oppressor. So it's better off that Allah ensures that these nations end up being broken up. Break them up. And let another people come and abuse them. And let them be abused. That's a purification for all their sins. Well, they refuse to make tawbah. All right, so be abused. Most tribulation comes to people because they refuse to make tawbah. So let them be abused. And at least the Muslims will be seen as oppressed victims and not the oppressor. But the moment they turn themselves around and they become pious, now it's in their interest and the people's interest and the interest of Islam that we unify them and elevate them so that everybody can see them. So that everybody can see the example of Allah's people. So when it comes to the rectification, Nizam al-Mulk realized our problem is in knowledge. And he started opening up these schools. And he died before he got to see the reward and the fruit, which was Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. Of course, he did overlap with al-Ghazali, but he didn't see the end result. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was the shining star of the Nizamiya Academy of schools. It was one big college with many little colleges. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, he had 4 main principles for Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. Number 1 principle was the unification of Ahl Sunnah. The second principle was to focus and target on heresies, heretical ideas. Today we have heretical ideas. They have to be refuted, like Quran only. Does anyone here believe in Quran only and no hadith and no sunnah? I need a show of hands to see if we have enough belts in the room. This is one of the most popular heresies that's happening right now. No sunnah, no hadith, no prophet, just la ilaha illallah, that's it. Quran only. Well, who gave you the Quran? Who transmitted the Quran? Oh, it's preserved by God. By who though? Yes, it's preserved by Allah. But who did Allah use to preserve the Quran? Did you see Allah come down every day onto the earth and make sure that the Qurans are correct? Or did Allah Ta'ala use human beings? Who were those human beings? Who were the first generation of humans to do that? The Sahaba. Did you accept that from them? Obviously you did, because you accepted many more centuries until now. So then why don't you accept what else they said about the Prophet, about the Deen? Why don't you accept the hadith that they transmitted? So Quran only is a massive heresy right now. It's one of the biggest ones. One of the biggest mind traps that people are in is naturalism. You have to be careful of having a naturalistic mind. A naturalistic mind is a mind that reduces things to what we can see. That if we can't see it, if it doesn't exist in the world, it can't exist. This is materialism and naturalism. That's a problem. Then are you going to reject the Mi'raj? Are you going to reject the virgin birth of Jesus? Are you going to reject the rising of Jesus and his descent back to the earth? And then, more importantly, are you going to reject heaven and hell? Somebody once told me, it's impossible for humans to have been really tall. You know that we have so many narrations, so many. Including that the Sahaba themselves saw the grave of Daniel, Prophet Daniel, in Shushtar, Persia. And they said it was huge. It was like the length of a room. And when they opened the casket, they saw him with their own 2 eyes, because he's a prophet who doesn't decay. It boggled people's minds so much, they were so enthralled by this, that the pagans themselves used to tell them, whenever we're in trouble, we carry the casket out and we pray. Oh God, whoever this righteous man is, because we have him, give us what we need. And we get what we need. Umar ibn Khattab, the people were so amazed. They're looking at a prophet from the ancient times, and he's extremely tall, that Umar feared for their minds, that they would lose their minds. So he commanded the Sahaba in the night to bury him and hide the grave. So we know it's somewhere in Persia. We don't know exactly where. On the western side, close to Arabia. But so someone said, it's impossible. Human bones can't hold that. I said, okay, bro, do you believe in the heaven? Because you're going to live for an eternity. And you're never going to get old. You're never going to go to the bathroom. You're never going to emit a bad odor. You're never going to lose hair or lose eyesight or anything. You're never going to sleep. So from the Awla, what's more appropriate is don't believe in that either. Just go down the path of Ibn Sina. Come to Queens. Because that's what Ibn Sina was. He was a naturalist. In the old days, they used to call them Taba'i'iyyin. Taba'iyin. They believe in the tabi'ah. Okay? Who's the person who canceled the name of Ibn Sina here? Sanjay. Well done. Well done.
It was a team effort.
Okay, good. So you end up with taba'iyin, naturalists. The naturalists, they don't believe in miracles. And so they don't accept half the transmission of the Quran. So Moses split the Red Sea was a parable. Jesus not having a father was a parable. He just didn't have a father figure, which doesn't make sense. And the Prophet didn't have a father either. In that case, his father died too. Right? But they say, oh, Abu Talib took place. So naturalism, you have to understand, is a heresy. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali busied himself cleaning out these heresies with refutations and books. And all of us have to study Aqidah and understand what are heretical ideas. This day and age, you can't say, I'm just a regular Muslim. You can't say this because it's coming into everyone's feed and in everyone's attention, and even kids and youth are exposed to this stuff. So you have to study these polemics and these debates back and forth. The Christians are debating Muslims all the time. And the Christian debate against Muslim ends up being, it all gets summarized in one thing. Aisha was 6 years old. That's all they got. After all these years, you come up with one thing. And secondly, you don't even have to believe that. Is it a pillar of faith to believe? It's not even an absolute fact. It's not even an absolute fact. Oh, it's in Bukhari though. Yes, it's in Bukhari, but who's she talking about? Talking about herself. From whom? She heard from somebody that she was 6 years old. We don't know who she heard from. Does anyone remember what happened to you when you were 5 and 6 years old? Or you ask, when did this happen? Oh, you were 5. When did this happen? Oh, you were 9. So Sheikh al-Dedu, he gives this analysis on this, which very good analysis. He said, you can believe it if you want, but it's not a hard and fast fact that she's 6 years old, married, 9 years old, consummated. Right? Because she's hearing from somebody else. Then you have another narration from her sister Asma. Between me and her is Aisha's 10 years old. Therefore, at that point, Aisha was like 16, if you go by that. So is it possible? Yes, it's possible. These are just narrations coming around. Let me ask you this. If you study Aqidah, is it ever a pillar of faith in any way, shape, and form? There could be necessary pillars of faith to believe in to be a Muslim. Like if you don't believe in 5 prayers a day, you're not even a Muslim. If you don't believe the Mi'raj happened in body, you're a Muslim, but your deeds are suspended because you're negating something that's clearly in the Quran. Your good deeds are in the balance. You can lose all your good deeds from this false idea. But, so where is the belief? Or how about the belief that people that never heard of Islam will be questioned in their grave or in the Day of Judgment by Allah and tested with one quick test to see if they're Muslim or Kafir? This belief is not an obligatory belief. It's permitted to believe. That's it. It's not the majority opinion. The majority opinion, never heard of Islam, you're going to go to Jannah. Okay? But it's permitted because there's an ahad hadith that says that. A solitary report from the Prophet that says that. We don't know much about that report, but if you believe it, it's permitted. So where is the age of Aisha in this? Non-existent at all in the hierarchy of beliefs in Islam. If somebody says yes, if someone was to come and say right now that I have absolute fact that Aisha married at 6 years old and then consummated at 9, and you said, oh, I hear you, but I'm not going to believe it. You cannot call the person a liar, that person, but you don't have to believe him. It's not an article of faith. That person can do good deeds and go to Jannah. So you have to understand and study the responses to all these heresies. This is one of the most important features of Ghazali's work, and it's one of the most important features of our generation, is to study and don't run away from these things. Don't hide under a rock. Don't look for the politically correct answer. This, what I just said about Aisha, happens to be true and politically it's correct, or socially it's correct. Because the West is sort of disgusted by this, and so it makes us look bad. This is called an argument from disgust. I can't really say anything about you, but I'll make you disgusted from them, right? And then we'll slander you with that. So it just so happens that the actual truth is that it's an irrelevant point. If somebody says, oh, I'm having trouble with the age of Aisha, 6 years old. I say, okay. How about this? What if she's not 6 years old? What if she was 16? Would you feel good? Yes. Oh, I feel much better. Okay, she's 16. Right? It's not an article of faith. It's not even worth the fight at all. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali wrote all these books, and then Allah chose him for his second mission, which was to establish the concept of withdrawal and return. The concept of withdrawal and return is a sunnah in the creation. Prophet Musa withdrew and returned. The Prophet Muhammad withdrew and returned. Prophet Isa was raised, some say in Alexandria, and he returned. The concept of withdrawing and returning is a sunnah in the creation, because we live between our responsibility to Allah and our responsibility to people. And our responsibility to people is in fact nothing other than a manifestation of our responsibility to Allah, our relationship with Allah. So Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, what happened to him was that he had attained celebrity, if there was such a thing in that time, and he had it. Celebrity status. He was called Hujjat al-Islam, the proof of Islam. Everybody was reading his book, Tahafut al-Falasifa. Everybody was reading his refutations of the Batinis and all his books, and he was the premier scholar at the time. No doubt, no question. But he felt in his heart an emptiness. And he felt and he believed that regular people that he would see praying in the mosque had more filled hearts with Iman than himself. So he actually fell into a bizarre case in which he became extremely depressed. And he just stopped teaching, stopped talking, stopped leaving his house. And this came upon him to shake him and move him from one phase of his life to the next phase. How do you take a celebrity, the most famous person, the most powerful person, he hires and fires at the Nizamiyya, he's absolutely in charge of everything in scholarship, to make him travel the Islamic world without his cap, without his robe, and just take up jobs in mosques, cleaning the bathrooms, cleaning the mosque, incognito. How do you get a person to go from one to the other? Sickness. And he had a sickness in his heart. A sickness meaning like he felt that all of his life's work was words and arguments that are rational, nothing in his heart. And so that led him, after 6 months of that, to hand in his resignation and to tell his family, here's the money, and my sons are now going to take care of things, they're old enough, and I'm leaving. And he traveled in the darkness of the night and lived incognito for 10 years. He lived mostly around Aqsa, around the mosques of Damascus, working, getting a job just to buy food as mosque cleaners, as a mosque cleaner. And there he would write, and he would examine, and he would think, and he would meet people, and he would not tell them his identity. And then at the end, a few people knew who he was. But in the process, he wrote the book Ihya Ulumuddin at the end, in which he rectified the Sunni scholars, and he talked at length about focus upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and zuhud, and asceticism, and the importance of what we now call, and he called in his book, tasawwuf, which is directing your heart fully to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, eliminating distractions, eliminating ta'assub, which is being just extremist for your school, losing focus, serving my school of thought rather than serving Islam, trying to gain fame rather than helping people. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali wrote the book, in summary, that integrated tasawwuf into every aspect of the curriculum. And he showed them how to do that by writing Ihya Ulumuddin. So he'd write about a subject, but then he'd write about the inner dimensions of the subject. He'd also write about the ways shaitan can derail you. And that's the 40-volume book, Ihya Ulumuddin. 10 volumes are dedicated to the acts of worship and their inner meanings. 10 volumes are directed towards the interactions, eating, marrying, all that stuff. And we call it mu'amalat, buying and selling. 10 books, 10 chapters on the things that destroy us. Envy, lust, forgetfulness of death, etc. And 10 books on the things that save you. Reliance upon Allah, zuhud, asceticism, decreasing your material possessions. Dhikr, remembrance of death. It's called munjiyat. When he came back, he bought that book, and that book spread like wildfire in Iraq. Everybody was attending his lectures on it, and everybody was reading it, including the Hanabila. Ibn Kathir mentions that all the biggest Hanbali leaders like Ibn Aqil and Abu al-Khattab were attending to Abu Hamid al-Ghazali's lessons on Ihya Ulumuddin. The integration of spirituality, of tasawwuf, of zuhud, of dhikr in the entire scholarly curriculum, and it wasn't very long until every scholar was including Ihya in their curriculum between Baghdad and Asham. Now, that's a claim. What's the proof? Abdul Karim ibn Ali al-Razi. I'm just going to mention names. Now, I can make up stuff because you don't know these names, right? But it's here in the book. Just to give you an idea that this is documented. It's not just a claim, oh, everyone took on the book. But he's given you specific names of lecturers, of teachers, of scholars who adopted Ihya Ulumuddin and spread it into their curriculum. Sa'ad ibn Muhammad al-Bazzar, Muhammad ibn Yahya. Said Ghazali is the second Shafi'i. Jamal al-Islam Abu al-Hasan Ali Sulami. This is one of the most important ones. Why? Because he is the Ghazali student in Syria. And Syria will be the place of Nuruddin al-Zanki and the place of Salah al-Ayyubi. So he is the one who was Ghazali's, essentially represented his methodology of integrating spirituality, asceticism, and dhikr in the curriculum. Jamal al-Islam Abu al-Hasan al-Sulami rose to prominence and took teaching positions, the highest teaching positions in Damascus, and taught at many other schools until he became the most influential scholar in Damascus, purely Ghazalian method. Okay? And so now, what is the Ghazalian method? It's integrating spirituality in the curriculum. What is spirituality? The study of the disease of the heart, how to get close to Allah, contemplation, dhikr, etc. Decreasing material possessions, studying the pitfalls. Al-Ghazali's influence persists. Sharaf ad-Din al-Mawsili established it in Iraq, in Mosul, which is a different city between Baghdad and Syria. Whose city is this? This is the city of the Zangi family. The Zangis live in Mosul. Nuruddin al-Zangi comes from Mosul. Okay. So Nuruddin al-Zangi will be influenced by the Ghazali ideas. Muhammad ibn Bahsin memorized al-Ghazali's book, was a cornerstone, and established it after his death in Baghdad, etc., etc. So many other scholars, including the Muwahhid, the Almohads, the Muwahhid leader Ibn Tumart. The Almohads, he was Ghazali. He took from Ghazali this concept. And all of these scholars now would encourage, when you finish your studies, you withdraw. Worship Allah alone, purify your heart alone, and come back. And we're going to see the Hanbalis also adopted Ghazali's methodology. The Hanbalis, who were at war previously with the Shafi'is, are now okay with reading Shafi'i works. And Al-Mukharrimi and Al-Dabbas and many other Hanbali teachers were teaching sections from Ihya Ulumuddin. Sections from it. So much so that when Abdul Qadir al-Jailani wrote his book Al-Ghunya, the chapters on spirituality, on tasawwuf, on the heart, are almost word for word. And some are passage for passage from Ihya Ulumuddin. So now we go to talking about the Qadiriyya and Abdul Qadir al-Jailani. Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, he was a boy from western or northern Persia, a village there of Ahlul Bayt and of very righteous people. His mother was from the lineage of al-Hussein, and his father was of the lineage of al-Hassan. And they were from a very pious Hanbali family. The father died, and al-Jailani was inspired to study, so he asked his mother to give me up for the sake of Allah. So at a young age, she sent him to Baghdad with his inheritance money, and he studied in Baghdad for a number of years, and then he had two teachers, one who taught him fiqh and one who taught him tasawwuf. He was his shaykh in suluk, tariqah, spiritual shaykh. And that shaykh relied upon Ghazali's ihya, on the study of the purification of the heart, the study of what destroys you and what purifies you, muhlikat and munjiyat. And he practiced it, putting his ego down. And his teacher put his ego down. And his teacher used to constantly put his ego down by making him serve, by making him the servant of all the other students. And sometimes even more than that. He would walk, al-Jailani said, we were once walking on a cold day to Jum'ah. And I had my books in my hand. And on the way, my shaykh gave me a little elbow, and I fell into the river and held my books up so they didn't get wet. And all the students chuckled. They said, Shaykh must have a wisdom in what he's doing. So they came out and they asked him, what do you think? What's going on? He said, Allah intended for me to renew my ghusl. Later on, one of those students, when again, Hamad al-Dabbas is the Shaykh, and he said, when Abdul Qadir sat in the front, he said, let me sit in the front before go sit in the back. They laughed. He got so angry. He said, you're laughing. I can only do this to him because he can handle it. As for you, your egos are too fragile. And that's why some shuyukh, they have that type of cracking the whip on the ego. Break the ego. Where does Hamad al-Dabbas? He was reading these same concepts from Ihya al-Ulumuddin and acting upon them. So what do we have now? The theory becomes flesh. And it became flesh better in the Hanbali quarter than anywhere else. And the final product was Abdul Qadir Jailani. Jailani went, some people say, for 40 years, but the math doesn't add up. For 40 years in the desert, the math doesn't add up on that. So it may be 4 years. He spent worshiping Allah all by himself in the desert. And when you worship Allah in the desert so much, you start having visions. You're all alone. He would say, Shaitan would come to me and try to lure me. The shayateen would try to scare me from worshiping. And he became strong in his fight against the shayateen. Then he went back to Iraq, and for 25 years there in Iraq, he inherited the Hanbali school in Bab al-Azaj. Bab al-Azaj is the area of the Hanbalis. The Hanabila have the pride of being one of the biggest forces in the reconquering of Jerusalem. Because more people, more schools are opened at the inspiration of the Qadiri school in Bab al-Azaj, probably than any other situation in Islamic history. The graduates of Jailani's school go on to open up a tree of schools that bare minimum are at 20 schools, all coming from Jailani's school. One of them, the Udaywiyya school, is one of them. Another school is the Suhrawardi school. Another one is the Bayani school. Another one is Raslan al-Jabari school in Damascus. Another one is in northern Syria, Hayat ibn Qais al-Harrani. Another school is Sheikh Aqil al-Manjabi in Manjab in northern Syria. Another one is Ali ibn Hitti, who was one of the students. And Abdul Qadir al-Jailani's son himself opened the school in Damascus. Hassan ibn Muslim ibn Abi al-Jud al-Farisi opened a school in Qadisiyah in Iraq. Abu al-Hasan al-Jawsaqi opened a school. And these are direct or indirect students of Jailani and the Qadiri school. In Tafzunj, Abdurrahman al-Tafzunji al-Asadi opened up a school. Musa ibn Mahan al-Zuli opened up a school. Muhammad ibn Abd al-Basri opened a school in Iraq, in Basra. Number 11, in the village of Radan, a day's journey from Samarra, Sheikh Jakir al-Kurdi opened a school. Bata'ihiyya Rifa'iyya schools opened up, which is a region in southern Iraq. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, oh, so much so that it reached Morocco. All from the influence of the Qadiriyya school. Because Abdul Qadir al-Jailani was not a normal person. He had karamat, he had miracles. He was the shining star that everyone wanted to be like. And his influence is by the permission of Allah. Spread far and wide to the point that the eventual government and army of Salah ad-Din and Nuruddin will probably not have anybody except that they were influenced by Jailani. So just as the Shafi'i Ghazali influenced Jailani and the Hanabila in their tariqah, in their spiritual path, also influenced the Shafi'is. And both were working hand in hand. Now what else did al-Jailani encourage? He had a women's department in his school. And women in this reform movement had a huge role. The Qadiriyya school boasted notable female scholars, such as Aisha bint Muhammad al-Baghdadi. Abdul Qadir al-Jailani himself educated her from A to Z, giving her an ijazah to teach all the subjects. And she devoted herself to the women's wing. And she became a pioneer. She would have preaching sessions for the women. Guidance, worship, and righteous and dhikr sessions, all for women. Okay. Another prominent figure was Taj al-Nisa, Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jailani's daughter-in-law. So because she became his daughter-in-law, she studied under her husband, her son, which is the Sheikh's son, Abdul Razzaq. Okay. Actually, sorry, this is his son, Abdul Razzaq, but she was able to access Abdul Qadir like a daughter, because he's daughter-in-law. She could go without hijab, go alone, and study with him. She studied in the Qadiriyya school directly with her husband and with the Sheikh al-Jailani. She became renowned. She continued working in his school for the rest of her life. The Suhrawardi school also had female members. Khasat al-Ulama bint Mubarak ibn Ahmad al-Ansari, the wife of the school's founder, Abu Najib Abdul Qahir al-Suhrawardi. And she established a lodge or a ribat just for women, likewise in the Hanbali area of Iraq. And she nurtured and preached girls and women until her death and was buried there. Shams al-Duha bint Muhammad ibn Abdul Jalil, a woman from Baghdad. She studied under Abu Najib, which is a Suhrawardi. Suhrawardi is Jailani student. So they're all direct or indirect. This thing spread and spread and spread until the elites, in order to show that they had some kind of, when they wanted to do something, they opened a school. Just like today, the elites, what do the elite want to do when he wants to show himself? He buys a yacht. Then he buys a plane. Then he buys a football team. Okay? The elites, it became so far spread in the culture that in a later chapter, he says the elites, when they wanted to do something, they would open up a school. And they would find one of these students and say, you want to run a school? Run a school. And they would name the school after themselves. Jawhara bint al-Hasan ibn Ali ibn al-Darimi. Salaf bint Abi al-Barakat. Fatima bint Muhammad ibn Ali al-Bazzaz al-Baghdadiyya. She was a graduate from the Qadiriyya school. Okay. Shuhada bint Ahmad ibn al-Faraj. She was known as Fakhr al-Nisa, the pride of women. She became a prominent teacher and reformer in Baghdad. And she taught men and women. Amongst the men that she taught was Ibn Asakir, Muwaffaq al-Din ibn Qudama, Ibn al-Jawzi learned from her. Muwaffaq al-Din ibn Qudama says the chain of narration of Baghdad ended with her, and she lived long enough for the young to catch up with the old. Okay. And he counts more and more. Zainab bint Abi Barakat al-Baghdadiyya, Jalila, Fatima Juzadiniya, and Fatima bint Ali al-Baghdadi. And he just gives us 13 out of many, many women who spread this amongst the women and raise the next generation. Now, this reform wasn't scattered, what they call like spray and pray. It wasn't just scattered schools, they collaborated. Jailani established meetings with the heads of the schools to ensure collaboration between the schools. Amongst that, this council that he had was Sheikh Baqa ibn Battu of the Banabus village, Abu Sa'id al-Qarawi, Ali ibn Hitti, Uday ibn Musaf. Now again, I'm reiterating, the names are not relevant to us directly, but to show you that this is documented, that they would meet, they would have meetings, they would assign, all right, if someone's interested in this subject, where should he go? If someone has this circumstance, where should he go? If someone has orphans, where should they go? They collaborated. And this is what's needed between our organization, is collaboration. Jailani and these scholars didn't say, no schools, just one school. No, they say, you have a school, you're going to do your thing, but let's collaborate. And make sure we're working to support one another, not against one another. And that collaboration is so important for us today. We need to have this collaboration. Nobody should say there should just be one organization. Just make it all one. No. And any organization that's working to compete against and to swallow up other organizations, you're missing the point. None of them tried to do this. In fact, they encouraged, spread it far and wide. But they collaborated. Lastly, we get to the political rectification. When you do 100 years of this, you're going to produce a wonderful generation. And that took form in the person of Nuruddin al-Zinki. Nuruddin al-Zinki was raised in a time where this dawah was spreading. So his father was not that religious, but he was. He became influenced by these great scholars, the Ghazalian method and the Jailani's method. And when he started to rule, he started to implement this. And what was his method of implementation? Was he merged the concept of a school and the concept of the military training academies. So he came up with a new idea, which was the Ribat, which was a military training academy half the day and a madrasa half the day. So these Qadiriyya schools that spread all over the place, he basically infused that into his military academy. And so people would join the military academy, but in the evenings they would study. And one of the things that he established was Hilaq al-Dhikr. And they established, all based upon Allah saying, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, idha laqitum fi'atan fathbutu, wa dhkuru Allah la'allakum tuflihun. Dhkuru Allah kathiran la'allakum tuflihun. So he combined military academies with schools. The madrasas that spread, dhkuru Allah kathiran la'allakum tuflihun. This ayah says, if you meet the enemy, remember Allah much so you can have success. So therefore he established the group dhikr sessions that Abdul Qadir had established in his schools. And he put them in the military training academies. So now he produced soldiers who were also righteous people, learned in religion, and extremely pious. One of his attendees in this school was Salah al-Ayyubi. Salah al-Ayyubi, they say he was a prince, meaning a rich kid. His father worked for Nuruddin's dad. So he naturally moved to Damascus when Zenki took over Damascus, he moved with them. And all he would do is play polo and sit around and eat and do these things. When he went to the military training academy, which was the colleges of those days, he came out pious. That's why you need pious leaders. They took their power and used it to infuse what he saw in the Qadri schools into the military training. So imagine what these soldiers were like. Every school had to have a number of scholars and a number of mudhakkirin, people who would establish the dhikr gatherings. What else did Nuruddin do? He organized the different scholars and the different Sufi groups so that they would collaborate, and he established an administrative leader to all of them. The administrative leader made sure they were all in communication, their gatherings didn't conflict, and they were on good terms with each other. And that they would establish gatherings logically throughout the east, west, north, south, and central of the city, so that everybody had access to a gathering. Rather than all the gatherings being on the east, let's say, and all being on the same day, with no collaboration. His name was Sheikh Imaduddin Abu al-Futuh. He was an administrative leader and made sure that dhikr was spread throughout the city of Damascus and scheduled in such a way, and that all the shuyukh were in collaboration. And then he organized the preachers and had the preachers preach publicly about the virtue of jihad. When you go to war, the whole city's going to war. And then he organized the poets like the entertainers for today. And he had the poets organize themselves and ensure that they were reciting poetry about the value of jihad. And he would have the Aqidah recited publicly once a week before Jum'ah. As people were coming in for Jum'ah, someone recite a treatise on Aqidah. Just recite it to the people in poetry form, so people were learned in Aqidah. All right, we're going to stop here. We'll take a short breather, inshallah, and then we can come back for any questions and discussion that you want to have.